ඔස්ට්‍රේලියාවේ අග්‍රාණ්ඩුකාරවරිය සෑම් මොස්ටින් මැතිනිය නූතන සහ බහුසංස්කෘතික ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදයක් තුළ නායකත්වය පිළිබඳව ශිවා ඩැනියල් සමග සිදු කළ විශේෂ සාකච්ඡාව.
Hello and welcome. I'm Siobhan Daniel. And today we explore leadership in a world that is changing so rapidly in terms of its complexity, connectivity, and diversity. And to speak to me, to talk about this, is a very, very special person. I'm very privileged and honored to have here with me Her Excellency, the Honorable Governor-General of Australia and its representative head of state, Her Excellency Sam Mustin. Welcome, ma'am, to Stein Studios and Sri Lanka, and Ayubowan.
It's wonderful to be here, Siobhan, and I'm so glad we have a chance to talk about many things that unite our countries.
Absolutely look forward to it. So let me start where I'm sure all of Sri Lanka is curious to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah.
You've been here for a couple of days now, and it's also not your first visit.
No.
So I'd like to hear about your first impressions this time around, and also a little bit about the backstory of your connection to Sri Lanka.
Well, thank you. It's actually wonderful to be back in Sri Lanka. I was last here for Christmas New Year in 2005-06, so that's 20 years ago. It doesn't feel that long, but it's 20 years, and I came with my family at the time, my husband and my 5-year-old daughter. So the visits are very, very different. So this is my second visit to Sri Lanka, but my first in my official capacity on a state visit as the Governor-General of Australia. And really importantly, it is the first time ever that the representative head of state of Australia has made a formal and official visit to Sri Lanka. So I feel an enormous privilege in that capacity, but a great joy in returning to a country which we really fell in love with when we visited as tourists so many years ago. And my initial impressions are a bit similar to the way they were the first time, which is the extraordinary generosity and warmth and friendship of Sri Lankan people, welcoming people to this country, and a sense of optimism, a sense of pride at the moment in what the future holds for Sri Lanka. And we have had the most exceptional welcomes wherever we have travelled in the last couple of days. And what I've seen is a broad range of extraordinary leadership, of commitment to the future that has been set by your new President and Prime Minister, and a constant reminder of why the relationship with Australia is so fundamental and why that matters as much to Sri Lankan people as it does to Australians.
We're going to come to that, the relationship between our two countries. But just before that, the office of the Governor-General,
Yes.
In a sense, it's a mystery. You are the bridge between this chasm of understanding and misunderstanding, connecting great history as well as a present and a future. So demystify this for us. So what is the symbolism of the office of the Governor-General? What's your role? What are your responsibilities? Just talk to us about this.
Well, thank you for starting there. And you described that beautifully, because if it's confusing or misunderstood by people in Sri Lanka, I can promise you that the same is the case in Australia. And so part of what I've been doing over the last year since I was appointed and sworn in is to demystify the role for Australians and to take away that air of mystery and misunderstanding, and to set out for all Australians and now for Sri Lankans exactly what it is that I do. And in Australia, that goes to understanding our civics and what underpins our great, strong democracy. And so my job is very simply described. I am the representative of the head of state. King Charles III is effectively is the King of Australia under our constitution. The Queen prior to that was, of course, in that role. And the Australian Governor-General exercises all the powers of the Crown under our constitution through into the role I play alongside the person who actually chose me, which is the Australian Prime Minister. So Australia's Governor-General is chosen by an Australian Prime Minister. There's not really a process for that. You can't apply for the job. I think any former Governor-General would say the same as me. You receive a call out of the blue from a serving Prime Minister where you are asked whether you would consider serving the country in this role. And that is what happened to me some months before I was announced. The Prime Minister Albanese, called me, asked me to meet him at his residence, and I thought it was to do with some other work I'd been doing on the Australian economy. And he asked me, completely out of the blue, would I be prepared to be considered to serve? Quite shocking to be asked that question, knowing that there is no process and that he had made that decision. He doesn't have to consult with anybody. He doesn't have to run that through a process. And in this case, he kept it very much to himself and a few trusted cabinet ministers. He gave me a very short period of time to consider that. And once I agreed, spoke to my husband and daughter, and we agreed as a family that we could do this, he then wrote to Buckingham Palace, to the King's office, to make the proposal of me as the forthcoming Governor-General. The King, of course, then makes the appointment. So I'm appointed by the King, and the King and the Queen before him have never not appointed the person chosen by an Australian Prime Minister. So the King agreed and made the appointment, and then shortly after that I was announced, and then some months later I was sworn in our Senate with the full Parliament by the Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia. So a very, very important set of matters there as to my appointment and then my swearing in. And then what I do as I exercise those powers is circumscribed by 4 C's. And the first one is constitutional, the second is ceremonial, the third is community, and the fourth is Commander-in-Chief of the Australian Defence Force. And they are all circumscribed either by the Constitution or in action by the conventions of the operation of the Office of the Governor-General. So I can take you through very briefly those roles.
Please do. Yeah.
We do this with students that come through Government House. Whenever I'm out talking, I do try to demystify this because, as you had in your country, a Governor-General in 1972, and for a short period, your Governor-General exercised very similar powers to me before you amended your constitution and made it an executive Governor-General and then President. I am not a part of the executive, and I don't exercise executive roles. I do work with the executive and the Prime Minister. So in my constitutional functions, I am the office and the person who gives the royal assent to all of our legislation. So the bills that are debated in our Houses of Parliament, when they are completed, they come to me to affix the Crown's approval. And so I sign all of the bills that become the law. I sit in something called the Federal Executive Council regularly, which is a function of the Federal Executive. 2 senior ministers regularly sit with me and we work through the delegated work under legislation, often regulations, treaty-making powers, appointments, and I sit in council and I have an opportunity there to ask questions, to make sure that the proper processes have been followed and to sign off on appointments, treaties, regulations. That's an important part of the role, but I'm working alongside the ministers at that point. Then there are other constitutional functions. At the request of the Prime Minister, I work with others to dissolve the Parliament in preparation for the issuing of writs for the calling of an election. And I receive the writs on return and I swear in the Ministry and the Prime Minister after elections have been completed. So they're very much a combination of constitutional and ceremonial. Community is really what I spend a lot of my time doing, which is something that former Governors-General, one in particular, Sir Zelman Cowen, said was the Office of the Governor-General, which was to reflect the light and shade of the country back to Australians and to the government.
Right.
So I travel all over Australia and I meet people, go to places often where politicians are that don't go, or where people don't want to talk to politicians. They want to see someone who has no politics, no policies, and is really just there to listen on behalf of all Australians. So I travel across Australia into remote regional communities, outer suburbs, and I listen to the stories of Australians, and often they will share with me things they would like me to convey back to those that have agency to affect their lives. It's a very powerful part of the role. I meet children everywhere I go to schools. I talk to young people a lot about their vision for a strong democracy and remind them about their role as participants in our active democracy as citizens. I often explain to them that Australia has one of the great strong democracies, stable democracies. We have compulsory voting, independent electoral commission, independent judiciary, a system where people show up as citizens and where we can change parliaments peacefully and the work goes on, the governance of the country goes on. The final role is Commander-in-Chief of the Australian Defence Force. Now, that doesn't mean I command the Defence Force, in fact. Again, this is a power that I have under the Constitution, and it is largely ceremonial, although on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister, I make the appointment of the Chief of Defence, and I can remove those roles on the advice and counsel of the Chief of Defence and the Prime Minister. But I work very closely with the Chief of Defence and the chiefs of the three services as a representative of Australians who care about our modern Defence Force. And I'm the person who most often will go to commemorations to thank and think about and reflect on those that gave their lives and sacrificed for us over in war, in peacetime operations all over the world. And so when I'm travelling to a place like Sri Lanka, it's been important for me to visit the cemeteries here, the Commonwealth War Graves sites, to pay my respects to Australians who died here during the First and Second World War, and to thank the Sri Lankans who tend to those cemeteries so beautifully and keep them in a way that Australians can come and visit to pay their respects. I do that a lot around the world. Most recently, I was in Turkey, in Gallipoli, where I attended the 110th anniversary of the Anzac Day landings to give the Anzac Day address on behalf of Australians. I spent a lot of time at defence establishments around Australia supporting the modern Defence Force. I guess, Siobhan, the last thing I'd say is when I was appointed and I asked the Prime Minister why he chose me, he said he thought it was time for a modern, visible and optimistic Governor-General. And so I'm in the business now of, and it's a big project, of asking myself and speaking to the nation about what does modernity mean for the office of the Australian Governor-General. And in part, it's to do this and answer your question about demystifying, explaining the job, talking about the fact that whilst it has lots of ceremony, it has some very significant parts that give stability to our democracy. And I'm very proud to serve in the office. I served for 5 years, and then whoever is Prime Minister at that stage will then go through the same process and choose the next Governor-General of Australia. But it's an absolute honour to serve, and I particularly like the part of my role which travels the world, particularly to places that we share common bonds of friendship and values, to see and to take the stories back to a country that admires Sri Lanka so much.
Absolutely. I think you touched on a really important point. Leadership ultimately is, and leadership in a very modern multicultural democracy. It obviously poses challenges, is a great responsibility, and also has possibilities and potential. And your role, in a sense, embodies those three very vital objectives. Your background, very eclectic and diverse background in corporate Australia, in the arts, as in advocacy. Did it prepare you for your current role? How did it speak to the symbolic importance of what you're doing, but also the very functional aspect of your role?
Yeah. I asked a question of the Prime Minister when he asked me if I would serve. It was the why me?
Yeah.
And he actually had looked at my history and he said because he wanted modernity and visibility and optimism, he said, I wanted someone in this role who would bring to life the office and reflect modern Australia and do it in a way that brought everyone together, that everyone would feel that they belonged. And if I reflect on my career, I've done many diverse things. As you say, I've spent a long time in the Australian business community, both in management and in governance on the boards. I also spent a lot of time in the not-for-profit civil society community, in international aid and development, in youth affairs, looking at gender equality and women's economic stories. I've done a lot of work in sport, particularly Australian rules football, but not limited to that. I served on...
But not cricket.
Not cricket, although I am the patron of Cricket Australia, so I now have a very strong relationship with our cricketers, and we could talk cricket as much as you like, because this is a very, very favoured place of our cricketers to come to Sri Lanka, of course, and many of our cricketers I know are heroes and increasingly heroines, because we've got great women cricketers. But I'd also worked in mental health, and I'd done a lot of work in understanding policy, and I started out life as a lawyer. So I was born in Canberra. I'm the first Governor-General to be born in Canberra, and I studied law and arts at ANU. And so I understand the Constitution, and I frequently visited the High Court when I was doing my degree and felt I understood the seat of government and the relationship through the Constitution with the various arms of our parliament and our democracy. I think there's one other aspect that the Prime Minister was aware of that that I'm very proud of, and says something about one of the other skills I think that the Governor-General does need, and that is I am the daughter of a veteran, an Army officer who served Australia for 40 years in the Signals Corps. So I grew up in an Army family. I'm the eldest of 4 girls in that family. My father is still alive in his 90s, and having been brought up in a military family, I was always aware of the role that defence and defence families had played in Australia's very storied history. And in this role, in the Commander-in-Chief component, a view and an understanding of the role of our defence and the history of our engagements with peace and security and the defence of democracy around the world was important. I think understanding that as a member of a family, as more and more countries think about the role of veterans and the families of people who serve, it gives me an insider's view, I think. So when I meet defence personnel, my first question is how their family's doing, and how does Defence take care of its veterans and their families. So that shapes me. I also grew up in a family of service. So the idea of serving the country in this form, I didn't expect it would ever come in this form, but I had watched my father over the course of his life serve the country in the Army, my mother in the service of the Army, raising a family to support him. And so that has been very important to me to be able to bring that to bear in this role. There is another feature, one last feature. It's a pretty big one. I'm only the second woman to serve in the Office of Governor-General. Dame Quentin Bryce was appointed in 2007. And other than Dame Quentin, all other holders of the office have been men. And so 2 out of 28 so far. I think the Prime Minister probably was thinking about the fact that it was time for a woman of merit and of capability to be asked to serve. And I take that seriously, but I also believe that gender should not be the determinant factor. It should be a job and an office that is open to anyone who has the skills, attributes and determination and commitment to serve the country.
Absolutely. And I think it's clear. You've taken away the ambiguity of the role and the function of the Governor-General of Australia, Your Excellency. And you touched on the great relationship between our 2 nations, the flags that are represented here so beautifully together. And that relationship goes back decades and is far beyond the political rhetoric. We have partnerships in education, migration, trade and sport and cricket, as you said. I think Sri Lanka's largest diaspora lives in Australia as well. So the ties are endless and we're bound together forever, I think. But what I want to ask you specifically is, what areas exist in your mind that we could perhaps work more closely together? What are those areas that we can develop for the future and pay more attention to, so that not only do our partnership and our ties get stronger, but also it's mutually beneficial to all our nations. Where Australia is as a developed first world nation, and where Sri Lanka sits as a nation that is looking towards her potential. 2 different places, but how can the 2 nations come closer? In what areas that we can both reach our goals and achieve our dreams?
It's the perfect and most important question at the moment, Sivan, and one that I've seen very closely here, having had the immense privilege of meeting your Prime Minister and your President to explore exactly these topics. I've also been meeting with your senior business community, with women's leaders from business and civil society, and your education sector, meeting young people. I'm going to visit many of the projects that Australia has had development assistance in, and to really engage at the community level in the next few days. And the reason it's the right time to ask this question is something I'm sensing being here. To hear the story of where Sri Lanka sits today, it feels to me that you are at both a very important and auspicious time. You've chosen a government, a president and a prime minister who've committed to anti-corruption, to a plan for the future to deal with your economic recovery. And it feels that the nation said yes to that in very large numbers. So a momentum that feels it's on takeoff with a huge sense of optimism. And now it's up to the implementation of those plans and to make sure that that big story that was presented by your president to the Sri Lankan people can now be delivered. And there are many aspects of that where we share a common goal.
Yeah.
We share the Indian Ocean. We're a middle power, and even though we have vast resources and a wonderfully strong modern economy and democracy, we also only get to do that if we have strong and enduring partnerships with nations that matter to us and who share values.
Sure.
So we do have shared values, and particularly now with the push against corruption, with making sure that everything is done according to the rules-based system. Australia believes very much in the rules-based system of how our nations should work, and the relationship with others around the world should work for us to all prosper. This is the time for us to now invest heavily in that relationship. You've mentioned a few of them. I think us supporting you in your sovereign maritime capability. Yeah. It's a very important function that you play, and one that Sri Lanka must maintain as a sovereign capability. Our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence was here very recently, Richard Marles, and in conversations about the things that we can continue to gift this country that help with that maritime security, with migration, with keeping our waters safe and keeping this country safe. That stability in South Asia and across the Indian Ocean matters deeply to Australia. And so that partnership, I think, will just continue to grow. And I see that through my Commander-in-Chief role. I've met with our defence leadership here, our military attaches, who tell me the same thing, that now it has always been strong, but now we're stepping into the modern version of this for your country and for ours. The education links cannot be underestimated. You have 20,000 students at the moment studying in Australia. I like to think that whilst they come to Australia, we should be in the business of ensuring that many of them want to come back and bring that and not have a brain drain. You're at a point where you need all of the human capacity, intellectual capacity, and you have such vast resources of human talent often that come to Australia to study. And we have over 47 educational institutions who are here in Sri Lanka working with local partners to deliver education. I think we could help you tell the stories of why vocational education is as important as university education. Yeah. It's a story we've had to deal with in Australia, and to make sure that vocational education is not seen to be the lesser of the two, that to build skills against the criteria of a country's skills demands could be some of the most rewarding and important careers that young Sri Lankans can have. Sure. We've just reissued the National Skills Program in Australia, reinvested in our technical and further educational vet sector. There is much we could do together to say, here, you have so many graduates of A and O level education who can't get places in universities and should feel really proud to engage in vocational training and get qualifications that provide them with wonderful skills, but wonderful careers and good money and a sense of actual achievement. So education is really important. I think we underestimate the power of the cultural ties between us. So many of my friends, my dearest friends who came from Sri Lanka are now Australian citizens, teach us about culture and arts. One of them, Shakti, my dear friend, has written some of the great plays. He now calls himself a Western Sydney writer. But of course, he's a Sri Lankan man of us now with an Australian life. But he's been writing plays that have travelled the world about what it means to be part of a diaspora community in a modern Australia that is trying to find its own way through multiculturalism. And we are a country that really is defined by the last 50 years of multiculturalism, migration and refugee arrivals, combined with our very deep First Nations history. Yeah. And I've been travelling Australia talking about the fact that rather than thinking about that as multiculturalism, think about that as modern Australia. That the picture of a modern Australia is something that we haven't really allowed ourselves to lean into. And it's the people who've come from somewhere else, have had families in Australia, second or third generation Aussies whose families came from somewhere else, which gives us an incredibly global orientation naturally. Our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, is a good example of that. Of many of our foreign diplomats, our diplomats who travel the world, now were not born in Australia, or families were not born in Australia, and yet they are our representatives of our nation, our modern nation, back out in the world. These are great strengths. And Sri Lanka, with almost 200,000 people in the diaspora, teach us as in Australia what that modernity looks like by paying respect to different cultures that we integrate into ours. So there's many things that bind us, but I think we're most interested now in how you and your nation, your leadership, business and the community come together to fulfil that ambition that your president has spoken about, your prime minister works to do, which is utilising the full human capital, working with your partners internationally to build this economy and to have the recovery then lift off. We visited the port you're one of the most successful ports in the world. You see so much traffic that comes through in a transnational sense. It's a very effective, efficient port. So you service the world from here. And I just see potential wherever I go. You have a deep sense of culture. You offer friendship. There is something about the similarity of our care for one another and care for community that is so evident. These are all things I think we need to keep investing in, and I think together and with other players and actors in a world that is contested in other parts, we have to remain strong and stable, and I think that's going to increase the level of our partnership and friendship as nations.
I think that's wonderful. The very fact that you framed it as modern Australia as opposed to multicultural Australia, I think is a very forward thinking way of looking at it. And I want to talk to you about modern Australia and modern Sri Lanka.
Yes.
But just before I go there, we've been talking about the partnership between Sri Lanka and Australia. Now, Australia as a whole, and then the subset of Australians, which are the Sri Lankans who are in Australia. There might be subsets between them as well,
sure.
Those who look positively towards Sri Lanka and those who might not. But just taking Australia as a whole, how would you like to encourage Australians to look at Sri Lanka right now? And if someone's looking at Sri Lanka with questions, with concerns, with doubts, is there anything you can speak to them about the potential that this country holds and the journey and the wish towards that modern Sri Lanka?
Well, I guess the one thing I didn't talk about, which is important to your economy, is tourism.
Yes.
So the first thing I'd say is come here, travel to Sri Lanka.
Yes.
As active tourists. Come and see for yourself modern Sri Lanka. See
Thank
the
you for saying
world
that.
you are traversing from your history through to your modernity. You have a contested history, as does Australia.
Yeah.
We all great nations have to wrestle with things that have happened in our history, and particularly for younger Australians to come and learn about your history. You're in the business, I understand at the moment, of something you call reconciliation. We have a different version of that in our country with discussions about the First Nations history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia. But we are both as nations thinking about what the elements that make us modern, where we first came from, the things that actually were difficult over many years, and then what we've come to be as we face a modern world and how we do that uniquely in our own ways. And so I'd say come and travel. My trip here 20 years ago was profound. It was a year after the tsunami. The physical environment had been decimated.
Yeah.
There was a desperate need for infrastructure and for people to come, and we answered that call to come and spend money, spend time and listen and get to know people here. And I'll never forget that. And when you ask me how I feel coming back, what is not different at all is the absolute sense of welcome and warmth and the wanting of sharing of Sri Lankan culture with those that come. And so I think so our tourism trade should grow, I hope. I think I'd encourage business people to think about what does foreign direct investment look like once you've established that you can deliver an economy that is corruption-free.
Yeah.
That has been a promise made by your leadership. That's very important to Australians and Australian businesses and those that want to invest. We have a lot of capital to invest in many different ways, and FDI is something that we do around the world where we see places that take seriously the rules-based system, do not have corruption, and where money can be invested for the long term, where we prosper together. And so I'd be saying to Australians, think about the journey that Sri Lanka's been on, just as we have been on, but think about the fact that you have been trying to deal with that through your civil war.
Yeah.
Then you had an economic collapse, and you have decided as a nation to choose leaders who say there is a path, not just out, but a recovery path that has such optimism and potential at its core that we should partner with you. So I'd say then try and meet people in the Sri Lankan diaspora in Australia, eat the food, listen to the poetry, go to the plays, read the books, and ask the question about what is it that Sri Lankans have brought to Australia that's making us a modern, active democracy that understands the world better. And it is about listening to one another. I think when I accepted this role, I said that the Governor-General of Australia the office should have at its core care, kindness and respect.
Yeah.
I think that's something I see in Sri Lanka, is care for one another, care for your culture. There's a kindness, I feel, and then the respect for how we go about the things we do and how we respect each other as nations and as people. I find here that you can immediately drop into a very personal relationship. and feel that warmth. And that goes all the way up to your parliamentarians who come to Australia on parliamentary visits. Our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade does some investments in Sri Lanka for your parliamentary representatives to come and see our democracy.
Sure.
We send parliamentarians here. The Prime Minister appointed Tim Watts as a special envoy for the Indian Ocean. He comes here regularly to see how things are going. These exchanges are so important to learn from one another. And I think Australians will admire what is going on here because of your commitment to lean into the future with a set of values and commitment to sharing that with us. So I'm filled with nothing other than optimism. And having had that conversation with your President and your Prime Minister, and of course, your Prime Minister is the Minister for Education.
Yep. So
she understands this human capital you've got, this potential you've got that you can share both with your own country but with the world, and you do. I could go on because there's so many things that are very positive about this moment in Sri Lanka's history, but I'm not blind to the fact, as I'm not blind in my own country, to the things we still wrestle with and reckon with, and have to be truthful about to encourage people to see a path through that and to look together with optimism, and do that well. And when we don't do it so well, be honest about that and know who our friends are.
I think what you're trying to say is Sri Lanka is on the cusp of something.
You are.
And we all feel it. And I can tell you, Your Excellency, that where we are today as a nation has been built on the backs of the people. The people have been unequivocal in their call and their fight for a corruption-free, progressive nation.
Yes.
And whatever you're seeing right now is a echo, is a reflection of that really desperate need. But as we progress, as we look at where we are and look at where we can be, obviously the world around us and even the vestiges of the past within our own country might say that division is the norm. Division is always around the corner, and reconciliation is somehow caged in the cave of political rhetoric and election pledges and promises and isn't really a thing. But I know that you, throughout your life, by what you do and say and how you live, are truly committed to real reconciliation that goes beyond rhetoric. And the reconciliation, as you quite rightly pointed out, in Australia, between your First Nation, for example, and the journey of your nation and my own, which is obviously a very storied history that goes back thousands of years. So we might be in different places as far as our reconciliation process is concerned, but the importance of a very deep and profound process, I'm sure you'd agree, is important.
Yes.
And that conversation is important to have it as a bastion against the other side. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, you've summarised the way I would think about this. Absolutely, it is. It's something you can't give up on it. It requires patience and perseverance. The leadership required to do this sits in all of us, albeit with some who have that at a technical level as leaders of nations, as leaders of the media. We all have our job to play. And patience, respect for others' views. I think I've said in Australia, one of the elements of care I think we need to have is not just care for each other, but care for our institutions and civics, and care for the way in which we debate the really tough issues of our time without dropping into anger, violence, disrespect, or exclusion. So how do we do an inclusive? How do we inclusively bring people along so everyone belongs? We can have our different perspectives, but ultimately there's something that binds us, which is how do we do this together that gives us a national sense of pride. A friend of mine whose family was Chinese came to Australia many years ago. He's now in the New South Wales Parliament, Jason Yat-sen Lee. Jason recently said at a forum about how the Chinese found life difficult in Australia through racism at a time. He said, as we look to a world where there's more of this tension everywhere else, Australia can look to these ties of so many different cultures, so much diversity and inclusiveness, if we choose to as our titanium strength, that diversity gives us that, and not to bring the problems of the nations from which people may have come into Australia, but look at a set of Australian values and what does it mean for Australia to prosper. And I love the idea that this titanium strength of diversity, rather than it being some objective that is seen to be not doing the heavy lifting, it actually can be the great strength. And although we use the word reconciliation for somewhat different processes and stories, very different with yours to ours, when we think about it, I think the way in which we do it best is leaders step up at important moments in history to lead the nation in a moment that actually says we care. So Prime Minister Kevin Rudd apologised on behalf of Australians to Aboriginal people in the national apology to stolen generations. That act at a national level out of our parliament was so profound that Aboriginal people said thank you for, on behalf of the nation, apologising. Now, the current Australians weren't the perpetrators of that.
Yes.
But the Prime Minister at the time, with the support of the Parliament and the people, made an apology that has had resonance throughout the years ever since, as we've grown to understand more about our First Nations history and how it should be a braided history, how all these things should braid together with the arrival of the British and the colonisation program in Australia that then moved very quickly into migration and refugee arrivals. These storied, three big stories, but underpinned by a strong democracy, a rules-based system, a citizenry that shows up as Australians. We can deal with the complexity in that history should we choose to handle it with care and take the strength from it and understand where we don't need to have the fight, but never lose respect for those in the system who did lose out, who felt hurt. And I think the simple act of apology that happened in our country said something in that moment that it was acknowledged. That was our history. I don't seek to give any advice to Sri Lanka on your storied history. It has complexity and drama and very important moments that only Sri Lankans can ever understand. And that's why I like my friend Shakti's plays and what he writes about, because he wrestles with that as someone who's come to Australia as a migrant and looks back at what does this all mean. So I don't use this as a teaching to Sri Lanka. It's more of a sharing. But our form of reconciliation does require a lot of listening, of taking the best of the eldership and stories of Australia's attachment to its continent that goes tens of thousands of years ago, and think, so what's that modern component? How do we best show that? And I think what I see in Sri Lanka with the steps of removal of corruption, the arrival of people who don't have a dynastic right to your political leadership, who represent the people, who speak about the people. I keep seeing that. I met the Mayor of Colombo this week, and her enthusiasm and her desire to engage with the people of local government in Australia to see how to work together. These are all moments to celebrate and to say, despite that storied past, there's something courageous and brilliant right now, and it does feel like a takeoff point. And I'd like to think that Australia and Australians are going to be working right beside Sri Lanka and Sri Lankans to achieve that, because I think we have very similar stories to share and to support one another.
To young people watching, you think there's a benefit to strengthening diversity? Because they've got to see some hope for the future. If not, at the very first sense of an economic collapse, people will compartmentalize themselves and go into their corners, and that we've seen it happen not just in Sri Lanka, but around the world. But strengthening that resolve to be diverse but together, united as a nation, as a people, there's a benefit?
Absolutely. I said when I took on this role to the Prime Minister and then in my opening remarks to the Australian people that one of my great drivers was to show up for young people. I think people in public office, in senior positions of authority, the people look to us, people like you in the media, they want to see a model of what it is that's being promised and is it seriously being delivered. And I think about that with every interaction I have, that if a young person's watching, they don't want to see someone who's enjoying the privileges and has lost touch with where the world is going or what the unique modern issues are for young people. They're very different issues. In my country, the levels of mental health pressure, the pressure of conformity through social media, disinformation, misinformation, a sense of how does a young person feel they belong in a national story and pursue their goals when their lives are so different and the circumstances are so different to as I was growing up. So how do we show up and behave in a way to give them a sense, not just of hope, but of absolute pragmatic belief that we're going to do it and that we're doing it because we want them to take over. We want that youth movement to come through. I'm glad that in Australia we spend a lot of time listening to the aspirations of young people, encourage young people to get involved in local government, to step into leadership positions, to pursue the things they care about and to be treated seriously. And if we don't do that and we assume we can just build a future without taking account of who's coming, then we'll fail. And so I think they need to see us not just promising things, but behaving and delivering things that encourage them to be active citizens. So it has never mattered more, I think, to give them a sense of a future that they will be part of, that they can prosper in, and that intergenerationally they haven't been forgotten, that the riches of whatever past we might have had are not being transferred. And that's why I think young people care about climate change. I think our nations share a deep concern about how we respond to the investment in climate adaptation and how we show up in international fora and in the Indian Ocean fora around climate change, on inequality, and the strength of diversity in that conversation. You have a group of people who come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different ways of life, and you bring that together and you treat it seriously and respectfully. That's better decision making. That gives you the best sense of the future, taking care of risks, grabbing opportunities. And I do see in your young people that come to Australia a natural entrepreneurialism, a spirit of doing things differently, and many of them are pursuing careers that will be very good for them personally and financially, but they immediately want to give back. So they're social entrepreneurs. They build social businesses that make profit but put the profit back into community. Right. They're teaching us about a way of committing to community as part of our future that I keep listening to. So yes, it matters deeply, and I see that happening here. That's why I think education has been such a strong part of our relationship. And you have got some of the most talented young people in the world in big numbers who I think are going to be helping to drive that great uplift in economic reform.
I think that's beautifully said, and it reflects this deep cultural sense of giving that Sri Lankans possess. We call it dharnya, which basically means you give even if you might not have as much as you'd like to. And I think that pervasive cultural norm is Sri Lankans carry it wherever they go in the world. And you're someone who also champions the causes that you just mentioned: inclusivity, gender equality, the fight against climate change. These are part and parcel of who you are. And Your Excellency, these are very diverse fights. The causes are quite different, and they're almost, in a sense, unpopular, difficult, very difficult, but they must be done. They are even denied sometimes when the facts stare us in the face. And this focus on the truth and facts, and then addressing that truth and facts, the objective truth somehow just disappears in all of the noise that I guess even the media is responsible for. So Your Excellency, my question is, you've lived a life committing yourself to fight for these important things. It's becoming increasingly more difficult. So how do you speak to young Australians, young Sri Lankans, to stand up and understand the objective truth and then fight for it so that they can be part of that progress?
You're right. It has always been. These issues are complex. The solutions are...
It's easy to be on the other side.
It's very easy. It's very easy to be negative. It's very easy it's very easy to politicise, and it always has been, to take sides and then fight a contest that becomes fact-free and is all about ideology or about the fight for power. Now, I have no politics in my role. In fact, I take that so seriously that I gave up my right to vote in Australia for 5 years, so that I will never have to write on a ballot paper a choice of party while I'm in this job. Now, to give up my voting right is a big deal because I take very seriously the compulsory voting system.
Is that a constitutional requirement? Or
no, it's not required. There is a convention of letting Governors-General choose as to whether they will vote or not.
Right.
And I chose to write to the Electoral Commissioner to say, I choose not to. Please don't fine me and please don't think I'm a bad citizen. But my reasons are quite clear.
Right.
I have to be totally beyond politics. Right. I have to have no policies, no politics. I have no money to dispense. So I have to represent something as the representative head of state that can always be always driven by truth, by advocacy for the nation, and to respect and respond to what it is the nation is wanting to have reflected back to our government. And I say that because when I wasn't in this role and I was advocating with facts and data around things like the value of equality, whether it was gender equality or the rights of anyone to be able to pursue careers in life and not be excluded, or on the climate side, how to find solutions or to try to prevent some of the incredibly obvious scientific evidence to say that climate change just keeps rolling unless you do something about it. It's a physical side of, or physics tells us that, and climate scientists tell us. And I came to climate through a very interesting lens. I wasn't an environmental activist. I wasn't someone who had protested. I came to it as a business person in insurance and worked for Australia's largest insurance company at about the same time that Al Gore was writing The Inconvenient Truth and talking about science from the 50s and 60s. Yeah. And to work in Australia's largest insurance company and see the data, the claims data, that showed that the country would have an insurance problem over the next 20 to 30 years with the progress of these natural disasters getting worse and worse. For me, it was an economic issue. It was a rational economic issue to raise, to say, if we don't do something about this major risk, the risk grows and grows and we will never get ahead of it. And who knows what that will be like, what the climate catastrophe could look like. So how I now describe that in this role with our politics is we have to remove disinformation and misinformation and deal with the hard facts. Yeah. And we have to lean into that. We can't do it as one nation. This is a global problem. That's why the United Nations matters. It's why bilateral relations matter. It's why we need to keep our oceans healthy. It's why we need to do things with Sri Lanka to ensure that we deal with the facts. And to your question about how do we give young people a sense of optimism, is we have to help them understand how to go looking for facts. Yeah. And in Australia, we're involved in a project on civics where we're asking, and media literacy. Yeah. We're asking young people, whenever they receive information, to stop and pause and ask themselves the question, where is this information coming from and what is the intention of the person trying to send it to me? If I can't work that out, go and look for the information and be active citizens, work on facts, and then think about what your reaction is and work with organisations who care about the facts and care about the future. And that's a very simple thing, but against a hurricane of disinformation and misinformation, we're asking a lot of young people. So in the meantime, adults, grown-ups, people in these positions have got to remain clear about why these things matter and how we're going to work together. What does it mean? What does climate adaptation mean at a global level? How do we help out nations that will be particularly vulnerable? How do we use our development assistance budgets to do more to help those to adapt? How do we help each other when these crises come? And in fact, Sri Lankans have helped Australians, and Australians will continue to help Sri Lankans. We did after the tsunami. We made sure we're here. We did again after your economic crisis, providing financial assistance. So we've got to keep showing up in ways that say we care and that we're facing this future together. And these global issues, we've got to have good answers. Doing nothing is not an answer for a new generation. And if they see us doing that, why would they not be angry? Why would they not fight against the system when we want to bring them into a system of trust? Yeah. I come back to what you're doing here and what we're trying to do in Australia. Re-enliven our civics, our civic life. Yeah. Show what people in leadership can do when they are not corrupt, when they believe in the power of the people, they believe in bringing people to more equality. Women are engaged, people of different faiths, people of different economic circumstances participate. To me, that is just the smartest thing to do, to bring together your greatest assets, your people, and show them that they care and we care, and that leaders care. And I've had a few people say when I talk about care and kindness that it's kind of soft stuff. To me, care and kindness is the hard edge. When you've got to be measurable on how you show up for care, how does kindness show up in our economic discussions, in our international fora, in a rules-based system? It's hard. Yeah. You've got to be prepared to show how you care, how you show that kindness, what the measurable outcomes are, and you've got to persevere and be patient and sometimes put self-interest aside for the common good. And that's hard. And that's what I think will define future leadership. I think it's what young people desperately want to see. They want to see leaders who say, it's not about my privilege or my power. Yeah. It's about caring for another generation. And I see a lot of that here. And I hope that that's what we'll see growing in Australia, because, again, our talent lies in our young people and in their diversity, and the strength of their diversity. In Australia, modern Australians are growing up in a world that is so diverse. It is unrecognisable to me, to the community I grew up in, which was largely Anglo-centric, with a few people with migrant backgrounds. That is not the Australia of today. I'm about to turn 60, and as I look over my 6 decades, that's where Australia's modernity has come, and it gives us, as Jason says, our titanium strength. Sure. Should we choose to tell that story back to ourselves and to the nations that we care about? And so that's what I'm enjoying about this trip, that we're sharing all these stories, and I'm getting to meet some of your young people.
It's incredible. The principles you're talking about are of the highest ideals and pedestals of humanity and leadership, almost Marcus Aurelius-like.
Do you know who does this as well, King Charles.
Sure.
So, I am a representative of King Charles. For all intents and purposes, as with all the realms, I am the effective head of state. But King Charles is the King of Australia, and I've spent time with the King, both in Australia and in the United Kingdom. And what I see in him is a modern king. His modernity, his desire for the Commonwealth to matter. We are both joined by our membership of the Commonwealth, Sri Lanka and Australia. He's interested in that. He's interested in what do these big macro stories of climate, of equality, of how we work together as a world. And I like that in him very much. And the questions that he asks about how Australia's going always goes to how we're going on reconciliation, how we're going on our responses to the things that are disruptive, like climate. And so I feel like this modernity that's dealt with and underpinned by care and kindness is something that the King cares about, the Crown cares about, and by exercising those powers through our Constitution, I feel really proud that I'm able to be that modern Governor-General that has optimism and kindness and inclusivity because it's totally consistent with our constitutional arrangements.
And I want to come back to King Charles in just a bit.
Yeah, sure.
But before that, just going back to what we were talking about earlier, on the challenges and opportunities that present themselves to young people, particularly young Sri Lankans. Sri Lanka sits at what I think is a silent Suez Canal. We have 35,000 naval vessels, 4,500 oil tankers, and 45,000 airplanes flying over Sri Lanka or sailing just adjacent to our southern coast every year. And that's even higher than Suez Canal, the traffic Suez Canal sees. And now, while that's an opportunity, it's also a challenge in terms of the kind of pollution that we're dealing with. And so I think these global challenges present opportunities for global level leadership. And that leadership has to emerge from Sri Lanka. So I think I would love to hear your thoughts on, in terms of a message to Sri Lankan, the youth particularly, who might be accustomed to thinking about a future maybe overseas, as opposed to a future within this beautiful island.
Well, I start by saying I'll speak against Australia's interest in this answer because we benefit from Sri Lankans who come to Australia to study and then stay. The brilliance of Sri Lankans throughout our medical system, throughout our care system, our education system, our retail, it's profound. That's why you have such an extraordinary impact on our sense of who we are. So I'd say to those young Sri Lankans, if you're going to come and study with us or somewhere else, come home. Make sure you bring those skills here. Don't be part of a brain drain out at a moment where your country is on liftoff. So do come and spend time with us, spend time achieving that level of education, but come back here as teachers, come back here as educators, come back here as business entrepreneurs to show a generation that there is something really worth fighting for as Sri Lankans in Sri Lanka. That is something to be very proud of. And now is the moment to have confidence that can happen. And as I see wherever I go here and in Australia, there will always be these ties in the places that you do your education, but to come home and to have a confidence that this will be a modern, successful nation that is actually showing the world. Because I think sometimes small is mighty. We both share the fact that we are islands. Yours is smaller than ours, but there's an ingenuity, a love of nature, a love of industry, and as you say, you see the world coming through and via Sri Lanka. Turn that into the great advantage of how you can be the most ingenious of inventors, drivers of business, of outcomes. But we will all have to remain alert to, a young generation will have to see the current leadership sticking with the plan that you are now on, that gives people an absolute sense that stability is now here and that people will invest. I'd say if Australia sees that, we will invest more. There'll be more here, much more here to do, to prosper. And those that want to come home then should come home and be proud to come back. And to bring back the skills that are also unique to this part of the world. You mentioned the challenges of pollution. I saw yesterday at the port one of the companies very successfully growing the traffic there whilst reducing pollution, CO2, water usage because of a commitment to sustainable development goals. This is a place that can do that and proudly say that there's no inconsistency between global goals on sustainability and growth of the economy. If you can do that in Sri Lanka with the advantages here, but with a growth plan, then you can teach the world to do that and have more of us coming and wanting to learn and invest here. And I think then if young people see the investment flows, capital flows into Sri Lanka, then there's a reason to stay here and to be proudly Sri Lankan, just as we have wanted Australians to come home and to bring their skills and not take them to the world for a while, but come back and be part of a program of growth and resilience and modernity, and know that we share values, we share friendship, but ultimately you need a future generation to commit and stay and be proud and then to take that back out to the world.
Sure.
So I wouldn't dare lecture or give advice to young people other than to say, I hope that the future here is so bright that they want to be here and successful and then take that story to the world. And I hope that part of it will be taking it through the friendship to Australia over time.
We hear you clearly, Your Excellency. The potential is clear, but we need to stay the course.
Yeah.
And that's a responsibility, not just with the powers that be, but also with the people and the media, who might be the people's watchdog. Not to trivialize things, but to lighten things up a bit.
Yeah, sure.
The royal family is widely popular in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
And I'm just curious to understand your relationship with the royal family and King Charles. Do you email him? Do you talk to him? How does it work?
So as I said at the beginning, he would not seek to tell me how to do my job.
Yeah.
He would not intervene at all in Australian affairs. And whilst I might write to him and tell him about how we're going, in the midst of the performance of my functions under our constitution, I would not write to him to seek his approval or his advice on matters that are of Australia's making. But where we have a very strong relationship is he was educated in part in Australia, in Victoria. Mm-hmm. He has a deep affection for the country, and like Sri Lanka, Australians have a great affection for the monarchy, certainly for the Queen, who visited many, many times and was much loved by Australians. And the King has already been once and spent a good time in Sydney and Canberra. And I was able to show him modern Australia and make sure he felt that he got a view into the diversity and the issues that we're dealing with. And he could have a sense of pride that we are a member of the Commonwealth that he cares about so deeply. And so we write to one another. I would say it's semi-formal. I would never seek to diminish the relationship or get too casual about it. I spent time with his sister, the Princess Royal, Princess Anne at Gallipoli. She is the patron of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and we were there at those extraordinary grave sites at Gallipoli together. And she's visiting Australia later this year as the Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Corps of Signals in the Army. It's the centenary of that corps. Right. So I'll spend time with her when she comes, and her visit will be people will be interested in it and be delighted she's coming. But I think we have somewhat separated the idea of monarchy and a very special part of our history with our constitutional arrangements and the fact that we are an Australian run and led country, that's where it happens, and that we don't seek to have others tell us how to do that. But deep affection for the King, when I see him, it's a very familiar relationship because he is such a lovely, kind man, and he asked me on his behalf to host events when he was in Australia. Right. The one he asked for specifically was a roundtable on sustainable finance and financing into nature and sustainable solutions. And Queen Camilla asked us to host a roundtable on domestic and family violence whilst they were at Government House in Canberra. They asked to meet First Nations people. They asked to meet the modern, diverse Australia in all of its richness. So we conducted a wonderful barbecue in Western Sydney for them. And that sat alongside a great respect for our Defence Force, for the institutions of our democracy, our parliaments, and the War Memorial. And so I think he's a modern king. I'm a modern Governor-General. We get on very, very well, and I think we understand our worlds and where we play in our worlds. I'm very proud to exercise those powers under the Constitution, and I'm always delighted when I have the chance to host him in Australia or when I get to meet him at international events. And as I say, he's delightful, and he cares about the things that I think young people care about very much.
Your Excellency, the world needs courageous leadership more than ever before. The democracy is at risk. The potential of young people is at risk in many parts of the world. And the kind of leadership that you're exhibiting, not just to your nation, but all those who are watching you and your nation around the world, people of Sri Lanka, not just women, but men and women, is exemplary and embodies the kind of courage, care, and sensitivity that we need. And I think it's easy to be transactional. It's so much more difficult to be profound, sensitive, caring, and I think the word is courageous. So on behalf of all of us here at Stein Studios, and I think I speak on behalf of all Sri Lankans.
Oh, that's kind.
Thank you for making it here to Sri Lanka for a second time. We hope there'll be many more visits in the future. And we wish you all courage as you continue to break glass ceilings. Thank you, ma'am.
Can I thank you very much and Stein Studios for reaching out to us to offer this extraordinary opportunity for a long-form conversation. One of the things in our world that is happening too much is sound bites.
Sure.
And pieces of information that don't give the population and young people a chance to reflect and think about where they fit in the world. So you've given me and my office a chance to talk about what matters to us. And I think we look to a future generation that is looking for us to behave in a way that gives them a sense that we do care, and that courage is actually underpinned by care, and that takes time and perseverance, but also these kinds of conversations where we learn to respect one another, learn from each other's differences. And I've so enjoyed our conversation and the way you framed how you see the relationship and how you see the role of the media, because I think you play one of the biggest roles in all of this, which is how you tell and share stories, particularly young people, but with all Sri Lankans in the world, that gives them a sense of their own agency and interest in what we're all doing. So thank you.
It was an honor, Your Excellency. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.